October 20th, 2011. A bloody man crawled through a desert drainpipe in Libya. His face was beaten. His hair soaked in sand and blood. Around him, rebels screamed in victory. This was not a regular man. This was Muammar Gaddafi, the ruler who once called himself the King of Kings of Africa. But how did he fall so hard? Why did the United States want him gone for decades? Why did his own people drag him in the dirt like a dog? This story is not just about war. It's about oil, power, gold, and a man who tried to change the world. Subscribe now to MysteryPlaybacksSeries. You've never heard the full truth until now. Tripoli, Libya, 2:37 a.m. April 15, 1986. Jet engines screamed over the dark sky. Bombs fell fast. Buildings exploded. Screams echoed across Tripoli. In one villa, a young child lay dead. A little girl. Her name was Hannah. She was Muammar Gaddafi's adopted daughter. Why would the US bomb his house? Why were they trying to kill him? And what was Gaddafi doing that made him such a threat? Let's go back to where it all began. Gaddafi was born in 1942 in a tent in the Libyan desert. He had no wealth, no power, just big dreams. As a teenager, he read books about Arab unity, socialism, and war. He admired Egypt's leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who challenged the West and wanted a powerful Arab world. In 1969, Gaddafi, just 27 years old, led a coup and took over Libya. The king was gone. The young colonel was now the ruler of a rich oil country. He called it a revolution. But it would become a reign filled with fear, gold, blood, and global tension. At first, many Libyans loved him. Gaddafi used oil money to build roads, give free education, and provide healthcare. He even gave free homes. He banned alcohol, promoted Islam, and ruled with his Green Book, a mix of socialism, tribal law, and strange theories. But behind the smiles, Gaddafi was preparing for war. Not just in Libya, but across the world. He gave money and weapons to armed groups. The Irish Republican Army, IRA. Palestinian fighters. Rebels in Africa. The US government called him the mad dog of the Middle East. President Reagan saw him as a threat. A supporter of terrorism. And someone who had to be stopped. Then came the moment that changed everything. Berlin, Germany, April 5, 1986. A nightclub full of American soldiers exploded. 3 died. Over 200 injured. The US blamed Libya. Gaddafi denied it. President Reagan didn't wait for trials. He wanted revenge. 10 days later, US jets flew across the ocean. They bombed Gaddafi's military bases and his own home. Civilians died. His daughter Hannah was reportedly killed. But Gaddafi survived. And he was now furious. Subscribe to MysteryPlaybacksSeries to unlock the truth they tried to bury. Gaddafi didn't just want revenge. He wanted freedom from the West. He called for an African Union, a single African army, and a new currency, the gold dinar, to replace the US dollar in African trade. He met with African leaders. He spoke of unity. He pushed for a United States of Africa. But behind closed doors, the West was watching and growing nervous. They feared Gaddafi was building a real challenge to the global system. And for that, he had to go. In 2011, protests spread across North Africa. Tunisia fell. Egypt fell. Now, Libya was rising too. Gaddafi's soldiers fought back with tanks and bullets. But the people wanted him gone. The US, France, and NATO stepped in, under the banner of human rights. They bombed Libyan forces from the air. Within months, Gaddafi was on the run. Sirte, Libya, October 20, 2011. He was caught hiding in a drainpipe. Beaten. Tortured. Shot. The man who ruled Libya for 42 years died on a dirt road, bloody, broken, betrayed. Some say Gaddafi was a tyrant. Others say he was the last African leader to truly stand up to the West. But one thing is clear. His story was not just about oil or power. It was about fear on both sides. A shaky video captured the final words of a dying Gaddafi. "What did I do to you?" he asked the rebels who beat him. No one answered. Because by then, the world had already moved on. If this story shocked you, subscribe now to @MysteryPlaybacksSeries. New truths revealed every week. Even though the US tried to kill him, Gaddafi wasn't always alone. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, something strange happened. Gaddafi began making peace with the West. He handed over suspects from the 1988 Lockerbie bombing, the airplane that exploded over Scotland, killing 270 people. He paid over $2 billion in compensation. He gave up his weapons program and allowed UN inspectors into Libya. And in return, the West smiled. US oil companies came back. British and French leaders visited Tripoli. Even Condoleezza Rice, US Secretary of State, visited him. Gaddafi said, "I have fallen in love with her." But it was all a game. Both sides smiled in front of cameras, but behind the curtains, Gaddafi still distrusted the West. And they still watched him like a hawk. In 2009, secret cables from US diplomats revealed something shocking. Gaddafi was becoming more paranoid. He feared an invasion. He warned African leaders that the West was planning to take his oil and divide Libya. One cable said Gaddafi was obsessed with a plot to assassinate him. He started hiding gold. Some reports said he had over 140 tons of it, enough to start his gold-backed currency. He spoke of the financial slavery the US dollar created in Africa. He wanted to free the continent. And that may have been the final line he crossed. In early 2011, protests swept across the Arab world. Libya was next. People flooded the streets in Benghazi and Tripoli, demanding freedom. They were tired of his rule. Tired of the fear. Tired of poverty. Gaddafi's reply? He sent tanks. He sent fighter jets. He gave a speech. "I will fight to the last drop of blood." But what happened next wasn't just a protest. It became a civil war, and then, a foreign war. At the White House, US President Barack Obama faced pressure. Gaddafi's forces were bombing civilians. There were fears of a massacre in Benghazi. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and France's President Nicolas Sarkozy pushed for action. NATO launched airstrikes. They said it was to protect civilians. But the bombs hit more than just tanks. They destroyed roads, power stations, and Gaddafi's army. Within weeks, rebel forces pushed into Tripoli. The West didn't send troops. But they gave intelligence, air cover, and weapons. And slowly, the man once called brother leader began to lose everything. Sirte, Libya, October 19, 2011. Gaddafi was hiding in his hometown. With a small group of bodyguards, he moved at night, changed locations, and avoided drones. But the noose was tightening. NATO jets tracked his movements. Rebels closed in. On October 20th, his convoy tried to flee. A US Predator drone and a French fighter jet attacked. The convoy exploded. Gaddafi ran on foot. He hid in a drainage pipe under a highway. But it was too late. The rebels found him. Someone shouted, "He's here!" They dragged Gaddafi out. Bloodied. Confused. Alive. Then came the beatings. Then the bullets. One fighter held a pistol. Another filmed. "Don't shoot. Don't shoot." Gaddafi begged. "What did I do to you?" They didn't listen. They tortured him. They killed him. And the world saw it all on social media. Hours later, Hillary Clinton gave an interview. She laughed. "We came, we saw, he died. Libya didn't become free after Gaddafi. It became broken. Militias took over cities. Tribal wars erupted. ISIS moved in. Slavery markets appeared. Yes, slavery in modern-day Libya." US President Obama later said that Libya was the biggest mistake of his presidency. The people who once celebrated Gaddafi's death were now trapped in chaos. And some began to wonder, was Gaddafi a brutal dictator? Yes. Did he commit crimes? Yes. But did the world make things worse by removing him with bombs? That question still haunts leaders today. A reporter once asked a Libyan woman in Tripoli, "Do you miss Gaddafi?" She looked around. Gunshots rang in the distance. There was no water, no food, no safety. And she whispered, "At least then, we had peace." If this story made you think, if you feel this truth should be heard, hit subscribe now to @MysteryPlaybacksSeries. More secrets coming soon. Before Gaddafi died, he had stored massive amounts of gold and silver. According to secret African Union documents, Gaddafi had over 143 tons of gold, more than a similar amount of silver. Plans to create a Pan-African currency, backed by gold, to replace the US dollar and the CFA franc, the colonial currency still used in many African nations. This gold was meant to free African economies and break the chains of Western influence. But after his death, the gold vanished. No one knows where it went. Some say it was stolen by rebels. Others say it was taken by foreign forces. To this day, it has never been recovered. Gaddafi's death didn't just change Libya. It shook the entire African continent. For years, Gaddafi funded liberation movements in South Africa, Namibia, and Mozambique. Pan-African summits, where he begged leaders to unite. Satellite programs, to break Africa's dependence on Western media. He even gave millions of dollars to Nelson Mandela's ANC during apartheid. In 2009, Gaddafi became chairman of the African Union. He wore golden robes, sat on a lion-shaped throne, and declared, "We are one people, one army, one currency." Many African leaders didn't trust him, but they feared him and respected his power. When he died, Africa lost its loudest voice against global powers. Years after Gaddafi's death, secret US State Department emails leaked to the public. They showed why some Western leaders feared him. He was gathering support to launch the gold dinar. He wanted to nationalize oil, cut off Western companies. He was building influence across West and Central Africa. One email to Hillary Clinton said plainly, Gaddafi's gold currency plan would give African nations an alternative to the franc and dollar. Another warned that if Gaddafi succeeded, it could weaken France's economic grip on Africa. These emails weren't conspiracy. They came straight from Washington. And they raised chilling questions. Was this about freedom or control? Was it about justice or money? After 2011, Libya became a ghost nation. Here's what happened. Armed militias seized oil fields. Terror groups like ISIS took over cities. Civilians were sold in open-air slave markets. Migrants were trapped, beaten, and caged. The country had no real government. Only warlords and guns. Foreign nations picked sides. Turkey backed one side. Russia backed another. France and the UAE had their favorites. The US gave quiet support but never returned fully. Libya became a global battlefield, where powers fought not with armies, but with money and bombs. And the people? They were left in the middle, poor, broken, and forgotten. If you're shocked by what really happened to Libya, hit that subscribe button now. MysteryPlaybacksSeries brings you the stories no one else dares to tell. After Gaddafi's death, waves of migrants began fleeing Libya and sub-Saharan Africa. They crossed the Mediterranean Sea, heading for Italy, Greece, France, and beyond. Thousands drowned. Thousands more became stateless, living in tents, begging on cold streets. But here's the twist. Years earlier, Gaddafi warned Europe. If I fall, millions of Africans will flood your borders. I am the wall that holds back the African tide. He was right. Europe called it a migration crisis. But it wasn't just about migrants. It was about the collapse of a gatekeeper they once feared, then removed. Gaddafi was no saint. He tortured. He killed. He ruled with an iron fist. But he also challenged the world order. He asked questions most leaders were too afraid to raise. Why do poor countries stay poor? Why does the West control Africa's money? Why can't Africa speak with one voice? He used oil money to try and answer those questions. Even though many hated him, many African youth still wear his image on shirts, beside Mandela, Lumumba, and Sankara. Was he a tyrant? Yes. But was he also the last African leader to scare the West? Some say yes. Years later, a familiar face appeared on Libyan TV. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, Muammar's son. He had been captured, tortured, and imprisoned by rebels. But he survived. Now older, with a grey beard and deep scars, he gave a calm message. I am here. I want to rebuild Libya. Some cheered. Others feared the return of the Gaddafi family. In 2021, he tried to run for president. But the elections were postponed. The country was still too broken. Even in death, Gaddafi's shadow ruled the land. In Western capitals, Gaddafi's name still makes people tense. Not because of his crimes, but because of what he exposed. That global power can crush a man in weeks. That media can paint a villain, then forget the truth. That no leader, no matter how rich or strong, is safe from the system. In 1986, Reagan called him the mad dog of the Middle East. In 2009, the UN let him speak for over 90 minutes. In 2011, NATO destroyed him. And today? His face still appears in protests. His quotes still go viral. His gold is still missing. The story never really ended. In a dry Libyan village, a child once asked her grandmother, "Who was Gaddafi?" The old woman looked out the window. The streets were full of rubble. No school. No safety. No peace. She whispered, "He was our king and our curse." If this story opened your eyes, you must subscribe now to MysteryPlaybacksSeries. We tell the stories buried in silence. Don't miss the next one. Some people in Libya still whisper the same sentence. He should have left. They say Gaddafi could have escaped. In early 2011, just before NATO stepped in, African leaders offered him exile. Zimbabwe, Chad, South Africa, even Venezuela. He refused. He gave one last speech. He stood tall on Libyan TV and shouted, "I am not like the others. I will die here as a martyr." And he did. But some wonder, why didn't he leave and save his people from war? Was it pride? Was it fear of the unknown? Or did he believe he was bigger than death? Years before his fall, Gaddafi gave a chilling interview. The reporter asked, "Do you fear ending up like Saddam Hussein?" Gaddafi smiled, then said, "I am not Saddam. My people love me." But history repeated itself. Saddam was pulled from a hole in the ground. Gaddafi was pulled from a pipe in the desert. Both ruled for decades. Both fell within minutes. Both were killed by their own people after years of war with the West. The two men were enemies of the United States. And in the end, they died outside the law. No court. No trial. just silence. Behind every war, there's a trail of oil. Libya had one of the largest oil reserves in Africa. Sweet crude. Easy to refine. Highly valuable. Before 2011, Gaddafi controlled all of it. He made Europe beg for contracts. He told China, India, and Russia, "Bring cash, not advice." But after his death, US and European oil companies returned. France secured deals. Italy increased its pipeline control. Libyan oil became open for business. Was the war about human rights? Or was it about black gold? The truth depends on who you ask. Gaddafi wasn't just feared because he ruled Libya. He played both sides. He worked with the CIA and armed their enemies. He gave money to African rebels and supported their dictators. He helped America after 9/11, then spoke against them at the UN. He had no true allies. Only deals. That's what made him dangerous. He said what others feared to say. He did what others wouldn't try. And in the end, no one came to save him. Not the African Union. Not the Arab League. Not even his own army. Because Gaddafi made enemies on every road. In 2011, when rebels took Tripoli, they stormed his secret compound. They found hidden tunnels, a golden chair, a zoo, portraits of world leaders, and files. Thousands of them. Inside those files were secrets. Deals with British intelligence. Letters to US presidents. Spy programs across Africa. Hidden offshore accounts. Surveillance footage of African leaders. Some files were leaked. Others disappeared. But one thing was clear. Gaddafi knew too much. And maybe that was one more reason. He couldn't be left alive. If this shocked you, if this story made you see history differently, don't wait. Subscribe now to @MysteryPlaybacksSeries. Years after Gaddafi's death, his son Saif al-Islam walked freely again. He appeared with a scarred face. One finger missing. Eyes tired. And the people? Some cheered. Some cried. Some threw stones. The truth is, Libya is still lost. Split between East and West. Rebels and warlords. Oil and guns. Memory and pain. In 2021, Libya tried to hold an election. It failed. Fighting broke out. Gaddafi's ghost still lived in every bullet. There is no grave for Muammar Gaddafi. After his death, his body was placed in a meat freezer in Misrata. People lined up to see him. Some cried. Some took photos. Some spat on him. Then he vanished. His body was buried in secret somewhere in the desert. No marker. No stone. No prayer. Like a warning. Don't rise too high. Don't speak too loud. Don't dream too big. That was his ending. A man who once ruled 6 million people. Buried in silence. Let's imagine for a moment. What if Gaddafi had survived? What if the gold dinar became real? What if Africa had one voice? Would the world be fairer? Or more dangerous? Would Africa rise? Or burn? History doesn't give us answers. Only questions. But many believe Gaddafi's real crime was not dictatorship. It was defiance. A boy stands on a rooftop in Tripoli. He's 8 years old. He never knew Gaddafi. But he hears stories. Of free school. Of full hospitals. Of fear at night. Of silence in homes. He asks his father, was he good or bad? His father doesn't answer. He just looks out into the dusty sky and whispers. He was both. And now, we are nothing. This is the story of Muammar Gaddafi. A man who dreamed too big, ruled too long, and died too hard. Was he a madman? A visionary? A monster? A martyr? Maybe he was all. But in the end, he proved one thing. No man, no matter how powerful, can fight the whole world and win. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, subscribe now to MysteryPlaybacksSeries. Real stories. Raw truth. Every week. Leave a comment below. Was Gaddafi a monster or a misunderstood hero?